We're here today with Andy Hedges. His new album is The Westerner, and that just so happens to be the name of the track you just heard. Um, Seizing the Big Today, one of my favorite moments in that. Um, Tell me about what drew you to cowboy culture.
Well, I grew up in a little place called Tokyo, Texas, about 60 miles southwest of Lubbock, where I live now. And my dad was a bull rider in his younger days before I was born. By the time I was born, he had become a primitive Baptist pastor. But I grew up with my dad's old rodeo stories. And I think I got my love for all things cowboy and Western from my dad. And we lived, way out in the country, and we paid rent on a little farmhouse, looking by looking after a small herd of cattle, and we always had a horse or two around. And I was homeschooled, and so it was somewhat of a sheltered upbringing. And we didn't have much pop culture in our home, but my parents were old movie buffs, and so I grew up watching old films from the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Gary Cooper, uh, Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, things like that, and also listening to the music that my dad liked on cassettes. And it was stuff like Marty Robbins' gunfighter ballads and trail songs, and Jimmy Rogers and Gene Autry and Johnny Horton and Tex Ritter. And I loved all of that music. I
And
loved
what decade
everything.
are you growing up in here?
Yeah, this would have been in the 1980s, but it was almost like a person who was growing up in the 1950s. I was born in 1980. And all of that had a tremendous influence on me. And for some reason, I was just drawn to the cowboy culture. When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to do was, go work on a ranch and be a cowboy. And when I was 13 years old, I discovered this modern renaissance of cowboy poetry and music. And I discovered that through an episode of Austin City Limits, featuring Michael Martin Murphy and friends. And Murphy had just released his first album of cowboy songs, and cowboy poet Waddy Mitchell. Sorry about the phone ringing there. Uh, Cowboy poet. Do you want me to hold off for a minute and you can edit that out?
Yeah,
There we go. It's done now.
all right.
Um,
Austin City Limits, pick up there.
yeah. So I discovered that through Austin City Limits, and it was an episode featuring Michael Martin Murphy and friends. And Murph had just released his first album of cowboy songs, and he had guests on that show, including cowboy poet Waddy Mitchell from Elko County, Nevada, and the great cowboy singer Don Edwards. And I was just hooked. I had found what it was I was interested in as a kid, and I became obsessed with cowboy poetry, cowboy music, and really working ranch cowboy culture, and have kind of been immersing myself in it ever since.
So, besides, you have a podcast, and you've
Yes.
spoken to quite a few Western legends. Besides the podcast and the music, what have you gotten to experience as, in terms of, living out the cowboy lifestyle?
Well, I grew up in the rural West, and like I said, I grew up around cows and horses. Uh, I had a few experiences, especially when I was younger, where I went out and uh, would hire on for a spring Brandon or fall roundup. But I was just a green kid, didn't really know anything, and I've always gone out of my way to say that I'm not a cowboy. I've never earned my living. cowboying or ranching, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for the men and women who have those skills and who've made those sacrifices to live that life. And so I don't in any way pretend to claim that title, but I have spent a lifetime living in the rural West and really pursuing these stories. And, I almost grew up, going to cowboy poetry gatherings. And by the time I was 15, 16, I was traveling on my own to perform at cowboy poetry events and ranch rodeos and ranch parties and you name it. And so I've really grown up with those people from that culture as the biggest influence in my life and my friends, and that's really the tribe of people that I feel like I belong to. Uh, but not as someone who uh, is claiming to do this as a authentic working cowboy, but as a close observer. And I've sometimes been called an amateur folklorist. Uh, and so I don't know if that title fits or not, but I'm certainly someone who's interested in the culture, and as an artist and a musician, kind of have found my muse in this cowboy and ranching culture and history, and feel like it's a culture you could spend a lifetime uh, pursuing as an artist.
Well, I would certainly agree that that folklorist, you definitely fit into that category. A lot of the lyrics you use on your album, do those come from pieces of cowboy poetry?
Yes, on this new record, the Westerner, there's several tracks that are old, what you might call classic cowboy poems that I've set to music, or at least poetry from the classic cowboy writers. Some of the poems themselves are somewhat obscure. Uh, but yes, that's where a lot of that has come from. There's a little bit of just old traditional cowboy music, and then there's some modern compositions as well.
Yeah. So the first song I played was The Westerner, and I absolutely love it because it is there's a section of it that almost sounds like Martin Luther King Jr. saying, you know, judge on the composition of character and nothing else. But it's also like cowboy style because, if you're fair, you're a friend, and if you're not, then I'll take you out basically. So it's a little bit Texas, a little bit progressive. I appreciated that balance. It was pretty pretty fun to hear someone say it's all about character. Oh, and by the way, maybe killing could help the situation. Um, so tell me how you came to choose that composition.
Well, it's from Charles Badger Clark, one of the great poets of the cowboy culture, and I believe that book was published in 1915. His first book of poetry, "Sun and Saddle Leather," and that's a favorite. That's really a favorite of all of us who love this kind of poetry and literature. And I go through these books and have for years, and I'm always looking for things that might interest me, and that's just one that I've loved for years. And at some point, I was reading that and picked up my guitar and just kind of felt like a melody came to me that fit the piece. And while I don't quite hear the suggestion that he's maybe going to kill someone who cheats him, I I do love that value that's represented, and I think it's a is a Western value of, uh, out west, we don't care where you're from or what color of skin you have or really anything else. We care about your character. Do you treat people fairly? Are you an honest person? And and yeah, and if you're not, things aren't going to go well for you out here. And just you, kind of your take on it, kind of reminds me of a great scene in Lonesome Dove. I don't know if you're a fan of that film or not, but where Woodrow and Gus hang their very good friend who's taken up with horse thieves and murderers, and you can see it pains them to do that because they love this man, but they also have to stay true to their code of conduct, and uh, and so yeah, I think that's a Western value, and it's kind of cool to see it reflected in Badger Clark's writing from that many years ago.
When you're picking these poems, are you thinking about how they'd play, uh, in a 2026 discourse?
Well, not necessarily. I kind of get lost in this old stuff, and I'm I'm more thinking about the time it was written in. But I do think that there's still relevance, uh, for these old songs and these old poems, and I think that's some of the beauty of traditional music is uh, is that it is this tradition that's being passed on, and that people continue to find these old songs and stories to be inspiring and to be relevant and to maybe speak for themselves in the current age. And but I don't get too wrapped up in thinking about how it's going to strike people in 2026. Things are moving so fast and changing so quickly. Uh, I just find a lot of meaning in going back to these old stories that really help us out west understand where we've come from and who we are as Westerners.
So, the world began when I was born, and the world is mine to win. Uh, Tell me about sort of that optimistic, go get it done outlook in Western culture.
Well, I think I think what at least the meaning for me in that song is, we have this strong connection to the past. We have this strong connection to those who have come before us. But, folks who are ranching for a living and these family ranches, it's very much a tradition that's being passed on, and the current generation is just as important as those who've come before, and they're really living out their own story, and meeting the challenges of the time that they're living in. And so I think for me, it's not just a lifestyle that's based on the past and a nostalgic view of what was what has come before, but very much that there's still people working the land and keeping the old horseback skills alive, and taking a lot of pride in the way they work with horses and cattle, and feeding the country and feeding the world, and it's very much a vibrant way of life and a vibrant lifestyle, even though you're facing these challenges and various things that threaten it. And so I think the song just kind of speaks to that attitude of moving forward, with this tradition.
So, um, tell me about some of the people you've had the chance to go into depth with on your podcast. Sort of the experiences you may never have expected to have had without going into a project like this.
Well, there's so many folks that I've been really blessed to get to visit with on the podcast. These interviews. Um, I think of the great singer-songwriter Tom Russell, who I'd been a fan of for many years, and Tom could kind of be a hard guy to get close to or get to know. And I'd met him a time or two, and asked if I could come interview him. And he finally agreed to do that interview. And so I went to his house and we sat down in his art studio and we did the interview. And what often happens is, through that time we spend together, which I'm sure you understand because you do the same thing, you kind of get to know a person and develop some kind of a relationship. And that happened with Tom. And I think by the time we'd finished that interview and it came out on the podcast and we'd corresponded about it a bit, we had become friends. And from that, Tom ended up hiring me to play on a tour with him and Ramblin' Jack Elliott. And Tom ended up on my last record, Roll On Cowboys, as a special guest on that project. And, we've had a lot of great experiences together, and that really all came from sitting down to have that conversation. I don't know if that's exactly what you're referring to. The other thing is just you never know when you interview somebody what kind of wonderful stories may come out of that. That they share with you, and that's a real privilege to get to uh, collect and record and share those stories, and kind of be a a guardian, so to speak, of these various people's uh, lives and stories, and things that they've shared with me that I get to share with my following.
Yeah, I very much agree with the fact that sometimes you feel like you've just been handed this immensely precious thing when someone talks to you about a really personal moment. It's a powerful position to be in. Talking about Tom, you had Dom Flemons on the podcast. You had Ramblin' Jack Elliott, just some legendary figures. We're gonna take a quick break at this point, but for the next song I'm going to play, I'd like to have you pick a track from one of your album contributors, whoever it might be, and we'll play a little of their music, and then we'll come back for some cowboy poetry.
Sounds great. I'd love for you to play a track from Ramblin' Jack Elliott, and one of my favorite cowboy songs that Jack sings is a song called Buffalo Skinners. And he has a few versions of that. I think my favorite is from his album that's entitled The South Coast. It's just Jack and his guitar, and this is an old traditional song that's there's a lot of versions floating around. There's versions that are even more about uh, cowboys than buffalo hunters, than this particular version. But this is, just Jack's really definitive version. Jack learned it from listening to Woody Guthrie, but Jack changed up the melody and added some different chords, and really brings the story to life in a way that only he can.
Yeah, isn't that the way with a good folk song? You have to trace it back through so many iterations and generations, and I'm always really happy to play something that flowed through Woody Guthrie's hands at some point. So, all right, let's play that, and we'll be right back.